The 598th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Alton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
They're dancing in the aisles. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for two. Louisville with 7 seconds. Jones has it, goes left corner, Black's here for three. Back iron, 1 second to play. Stick up, no! Carolina wins it! The Tar Heels win it! 72-71. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding me?
Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services, and Josh and Ashtin here with you once again tonight. It's Ashton's analysis. We'll get the season preview. Little bro jumping on the podcast, ready to talk some Carolina basketball. So we got a handful of topics that we will cover tonight ahead of course, the upcoming season, the first exhibition that Carolina will play, so on and so forth. Before we get to that, though, we start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day, which is now brought to you by Legacy Arcade. And Legacy Arcade and Social Casino are where you can win cash prizes playing roulette, blackjack, your favorite slot games, and multiplayer fish games. You can also win cash prizes playing your favorite arcade games. If you scan that QR code, get to that website, and use the promo code HEELS, that'll get you $100 in free match play upon registering your account. And one of the benefits of playing with Legacy Arcade is that it's safe, secure, and reliable with 24-hour customer support with instant redemption immediately to your bank or your credit card on file. They accept all major credit cards, Skrill, ACH, with Apple Pay coming very, very soon. Today's pod thought of the day comes from the godfather of Carolina basketball, Dean Smith. That thought is, quote, only praise behavior that you want repeated. Never use false praise. That's a real good quote for this time of the year where Carolina, they're building their habits for the type of team that they're going to be for the upcoming season with all the work they've done in practice, what they've done in the blue-white scrimmages, and what they'll do over the next week or so with the exhibitions against BYU and against Winston-Salem State. Let's go ahead and get right to tonight's edition of the podcast, the meat and potatoes, if you will, and that's Ashton's analysis. He wanted to come on here and do a season preview for the upcoming season. So let's go ahead and get to the type of topics that he wanted to cover and discuss here this afternoon. The first thing is, Carolina enters the season preseason ranked in the AP poll for the 20th straight season. They're ranked 25th, the last team in the AP poll. And if you go over to KenPom, a analytical site, they come in preseason ranked 33rd. When you look at those two rankings, those are the people are going to use the AP poll and KenPom is still the most analytical reference site in college basketball. Yes, you've got Bart Torvik, you've got Evan Miyakawa, you've got some other sites that are gaining national attention as well, but everyone, including myself, defaults to KenPom. What do you make of those first two rankings for Carolina in the preseason ahead of this upcoming 2025-26 campaign?
Well, I think it's interesting because I don't know if a lot of people really know what this Carolina team is going to be. We've seen how the roster has been constructed, but this is largely an entirely new roster. So, I feel like the 25th ranking in the AP poll was almost kind of a name ranking for Carolina because, we expect Carolina to be ranked at the beginning of each season. And so they slotted them in at 25th. 33rd in KenPom was interesting to me. Just because it is a little bit lower than the AP poll, but I feel like both rankings are kind of they feel like kind of the good and the bad of where people think Carolina is going to be this year, because I feel like the average of that, which is around 28th, 29th, is where people actually think Carolina is going to be, at the start of this season. But I think the rankings are definitely justified. But it's going to be interesting to see, because of this entirely new roster, if Carolina can come out. And I guess we're going to see it in the BYU game because BYU's ranked 8th. If Carolina can come out and justify that ranking early in the year.
I think what's even more interesting when you look at KenPom, Carolina 33rd overall, but their adjusted offensive rating, was a 116.1. That's 25th. Their defensive rating, a 96.9, that's 45th. And those are, per 100 possessions. I would be disappointed if that's where Carolina, falls this year. I think their offense should be better than 25th. I think this offense should be explosive and dynamic. And I love the potential of what this group can be defensively. So if they are the 45th rated, team defensively, according to KenPom, I'm telling you, as a Carolina fan that looks at this roster and the way that's constructed, I'd be disappointed. So when you look at those two ratings, those are the even the more significant numbers is how efficient you are per 100 possessions. If Carolina is 25th in offense and 45th in defense, would you be happy or would you be disappointed as a Carolina fan?
I don't know, because I feel like a team that has those ratings where they're at is a low-tier top 25 team. Because, you have some teams that are good at offense but not so great at defense, and then good at defense and not so great at offense, a la Tony Bennett, Virginia. So I feel like if offensive efficiency numbers are in the top 20, top 15, I'll be happy. And then defensively, I understand the potential just because of the length and the athletes that we have on this team. But I feel like 45th is a good ranking, because at 45th, you're probably only giving up around, 70 points a game maybe. And I feel like that's a good benchmark, especially if we have an explosive offense. And you also have to think about it this way. Maybe it is a per 100 rating, but in terms of the defensive side, Carolina is going to be giving up points, because if we run the way that Hubert Davis has said he wants to run, then the other team's going to get a lot more possessions and we're going to see higher defensive numbers. But I guess it's an efficiency rating, so that doesn't matter as much. So going back to it, I guess, I would be a little bit disappointed if we were in the 40s. I would expect us, with the athletes that we have on this team, to be maybe high 30s, maybe low or not high 30s, low 30s, high 20s. So I guess we'll just have to see what happens. But I'm looking forward to seeing what those efficiency numbers are as the season goes on.
The thing that I think would concern me, if you're a Carolina fan, I don't know if they're the 25th rated offense and the 45th rated defense, if that sets them up to have the type of success we want them to have, that we expect them to have, and that Hubert Davis, quite frankly, needs to have to ensure he's on the bench next year in Chapel Hill. Maybe it does. Those numbers would not suggest that you're a Final Four team. Those numbers would not suggest that you're playing for a national championship. Maybe those are second weekend of the tournament type of numbers, but maybe you're having to do so as a 6 seed that has to, upset someone along the way. And so I think that's something that if you're a Carolina fan that, and I went on my passionate plea the other night, it's imperative that you support Hubert Davis and that he establish himself as the guy to lead this program, because there isn't an obvious candidate in the family to come replace him. I don't know what those numbers would suggest that he's able to achieve that in a manner that we've talked about so far this offseason. Speaking of Hubert Davis, one of the goals that he outlined for the program really during the season last year, when the season went sideways, was to add more size and shooting to the roster, and build legitimate depth. And you look at this roster right now, this is the biggest roster that he has had in his now 5 years leading the program. I don't know if this team is a better shooting team than what he had his first year with Brady Manick, because, you had him, you had Caleb Love, you had RJ Davis, you had three guys that could go, bonkers from the outside at any given time. There are much more capable shooters on this roster than there was a year ago. Roster construction was the buzzword in the sport a year ago. And that was whenever when Duke got talked about, it was the way they constructed their roster allowed them to have the type of season they had in the regular season before another choke job in March when they failed to make the national championship game. When you look at this roster, which features 11 newcomers, how does it compare to the job that Hubert Davis has done in the past, building a roster that could compete for ACC and national championships?
I think if you look at just the overall potential of this roster, it is sky high, because we have several guys that transferred in that were key contributors in other places, but were young in those other places. And that's where, you look at this team, and first of all, you brought in a top 5 freshman in college basketball in Caleb Wilson. You brought in a big man in Henry Vissar that's going to be your rim protector and is also more of a vocal leader on the floor. We saw that over the summer. And overall, the upgrade in size is huge, because last year's team was small. We all knew it. When the tallest player on the floor is 6'9" and Vin Allen Lubin, and 6'9" is generous, something's something is up. And now we're going to have multiple guys that are bigger, taller, stronger, and faster out there. And I think when you talk about size, you have to look at the guards as well, because last year's guards compared to this year were just small. You had RJ Davis was, 6 foot on a good day. Ian Jackson, 6'1". Seth Trimble's not a small guard by any means, but when he was having to play the 3, he's a small guard compared to the guys he's going up against. And now you look at this year, we've brought in guys like Jonathan Powell, 6'6". He's going to play the 3 more than likely. Luka Bogovac, or if I'm pronouncing the name right, is 6'5", 6'6". He's going to play the 2 or the 3. You just look at the overall size, and it's a lot better. Talent-wise, I feel like it's kind of equal between the two teams, because last year's team had a lot of talent that ended up going unfulfilled. But in terms of roster construction for position size, and in terms of depth especially, this team has way more depth than last year's team, I feel like. It's definitely better than it was last year. And I think his first year was more of Roy Williams' team. This year, I feel like, is the best roster that Hubert Davis, as the head coach, has constructed since 2022, when he brought in guys like Harrison Ingram and Cormac Ryan.
Yeah, I think the thing you love about this roster is the positional size you have across the front court and the back court. Yes, Carolina's bigger up front. They're also bigger in the back court with bigger guards than what you had a year ago. And I think that'll be something that'll be noticeable and be a big impact for Carolina, especially, I think, on the defensive end of the floor. This is the first time he's had a roster without any connections to Roy Williams. So this is, for the first time, these are his players. These are his high school recruits. These are his transfers, so on and so forth. And for the first time, he has legitimate depth. I've talked about it all summer long. There's no excuse for Carolina not to be 8-9 deep in ACC play. And if we get into conference play and Hubert Davis is playing 6 or 7 dudes, that'll be an indictment on him as a head coach. And that'll be something that we could hold against him during this all-important evaluation year, where that's been a constant criticism of his, is that he's been unable to develop a consistent rotation year in, year out. When he's been able to do so, Carolina's been really good. They've won at the clip that you expect Carolina to win at. When he hasn't, you've seen them struggle and be pretty much a middle-of-the-road program, which is not acceptable here. So there's no doubt this is his best roster, top to bottom, in terms of talent, depth, experience, versatility. And that's why I think their ceiling is a lot higher than what their preseason ranking would lead you to believe. This group ceiling is Final Four. Do they emerge as a national title team? I don't know, because I think there's a clear, gap with those teams at the top, primarily, the Purdue's of the world, Houston. I also look at
Florida, especially.
Florida's going to be really doggone good.
As
St.
much
John's,
as you hate to say it, Duke is going to be there as well.
There's to me, there's a gap between national champion and Final Four contender, but I think this roster has Final Four potential if it all comes together. Speaking of Hubert Davis, interested to get your opinion on this. Anthony and I have both kind of, declared what he has to do to silence the criticism, to shut the doubters up, and really end the speculation of his job security. For me, it's either win an ACC regular season championship and earn a high seed in the tournament, or make a run to the second weekend of the tournament, regardless of seed line. If he does one of those two things, I don't think we got to kind of worry about him being the right man for the job moving forward. What do you think Hubert Davis has to do to solidify himself as the right man to lead Carolina basketball into 2026 and beyond?
This is a really simple question. He has to, number one, avoid the bubble, because I don't think Carolina fans are going to want to deal with another year of Joe Lunardi saying that we're either, that we're in like the last four buys or first four out, or we don't want to hear that. We're North Carolina. We don't want to be on the bubble at any point in the season. So number one, avoid the bubble. And I guess part of that means you need a top 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. But I go so far as to say, if he doesn't get a top 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, there's going to be some speculation. And then I agree with you. He needs to make the Sweet 16, because Dean Smith set the precedent of this team is going to be a second weekend team in each year. And Hubert Davis has not met that yet. He's missed the tournament. He's been a first-round exit. And I definitely think that if Carolina wants to stay where they're at, and because Carolina needs to be a power in the college basketball world, and college basketball as a whole is better when Carolina is a power. So for Carolina to be inconsistent these past couple of years, I'd go so far as to say it's bad for the game of basketball. It's bad for the game for ACC. It's bad for the ACC. It's bad for, it's bad for people who tune in, and you don't see North Carolina at the top, and it's not the same. So for Hubert Davis to avoid speculation next year, he has to, number one, get a top 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, and number 2, make the second weekend. It's that simple.
Yeah, I don't really give a crap about what's good for the sport and in its entirety, and what's in the best interest for the ACC. They need to win so I have a better life. Because my mental health and my physical health revolves around this team. When this team wins, I'm happy. When this team loses, I don't sleep and I'm a grumpy pain in the butt. So hopefully they can win a lot more than what they've done. I think, the worst case scenario is they get a top 6 seed in the tournament, but they get upset in that 6-11 game. What do you do with them? Is that a fireable offense? Is that justified? I don't know. So that's why I'm hoping. Hey, I don't think they're going to win the ACC, but you win an ACC championship. I'm not going to say I don't care what you do in the tournament, but it lessens the pressure on you once you get into the NCAA tournament because you will not have 2 ACC regular season titles in 5 years. Or if you just, are a 3 seed, you make it to the second weekend, you get knocked out in the Sweet 16. I'll be disappointed. I'll be upset, but I would have seen enough that'd be, 3 Sweet 16s in 5 years. Okay, you've done enough to keep your job for the foreseeable future. What really sucks in all of this is Carolina has not made it known that his job's on the line. When we talk about his job security, it's purely from a fan speculation standpoint. There's nothing that's come from the Carolina building, from the administration, from the athletic department, from Roy Williams, who's ultimately the decision maker on his job, that lead us to believe he's coaching for his job. But when you've just gone on the roller coaster that Carolina's gone on, us as fans are going to say, yeah, he's got to coach for his job. He's got to win more to solidify his position on the bench because, we just expect more than what he's done. And he's done a lot of good. I mean, he's won 69% of his games. He's won an ACC title. He's made a Final Four. He was a rebound away from winning a national championship. He's coached an All-American in RJ Davis. Like 95% of the places in the country would have killed for the last 4 years that we've been able to experience. It's just not the case here. This is as pressure-packed a job there is in college basketball. This is as pressure-packed a job there is in college sports. He knows that. He's admitted to that. And that's why he knows he's got to deliver in a big way in 2025 and 2026. Transition, flip our attention back to the roster. 11 new faces join Carolina basketball when you factor in transfers, freshmen, and international pros. Which newcomer do you think will have the biggest impact on Carolina this upcoming year?
The obvious answer is Caleb Wilson, but I'm going to go away from the obvious answer, and I'm going to say a person that's probably going to be coming off the bench for Carolina, and I'm going to say Jonathan Powell, because the shooting that he brings to this team and the depth, he's going to be, if he's the sixth man, he's going to be a crucial part of this rotation. And, you may be surprised by me saying Jonathan Powell. Oh, my goodness, he's not in the starting lineup. But what he is going to bring this team is the depth that we lacked last year. We had guys that could come off the bench, but they weren't the quality that he brings. He was good at West Virginia, 8 points a game or whatever it was. And I feel like if he can do that here coming off of the bench, it just elevates this team. Plus his size is huge, 6'6". When he comes in, he'll probably be defending whoever the opponent's big guard is, and that'll be huge. So he may not make the largest impact on the team, but I feel like, just overall having him on this team is going to be an X factor.
Look, you're entitled to your opinion. If he's the most impactful newcomer for Carolina basketball, we are screwed. And it's not going to be a fun year. The right answer is Caleb Wilson because he's the most gifted player on Carolina's roster. The second best answer is probably Luka Bogovac because he's played professional basketball overseas. Carolina's got to get him cleared so his butt can be on the floor. I do think Jonathan Powell is going to have a good season. And I saw him in person at the Blue-White game, and I could watch that kid shoot the basketball and not get bored. He's fun to watch. He's got a fluid shooting motion. I like the fact he's coming from the power conference level. He competes. He runs the floor well. I think he can defend better than what you saw on tape at West Virginia. But if he's Carolina's most impactful transfer or newcomer, then a lot of things went wrong for Carolina this season.
Just hear me out, though. Just hear me out.
Oh, I heard you, and if that's the guy that I'm looking at and saying, yep, he's having a bigger impact than Caleb Wilson, that he's having a bigger impact than Luka Bogovac? I'd argue Kyan Evans. If he's having a bigger impact than those three guys, there's going to be a lot of angry podcasts because that would suggest to me that Carolina falls flat on its face and they're not even a tournament team this upcoming year.
Yeah, but what happens if he becomes the breakout player that we've been looking for? Because I feel like he has that kind of potential with his shooting.
I don't think that's in the – it's like I've said about Seth Trimble being this team's leading scorer. If Jonathan Powell is your breakout player, not a good thing. You've got better players with a higher ceiling than Jonathan Powell that need to break out over him for this season to go the way we want it to go. He could be a really good player. He could be Cam Johnson light, where that he could shoot 40% from three and be a great two-way player. But his talent level isn't on the same level as a Caleb Wilson, a Luka, heck, not even Kyan Evans. So, but hey, that's your opinion. You're entitled to it, but like I like to tell people all the time, you're entitled to be wrong with your opinion as well. All right. A few more bullet points for this season preview. We're doing Ashton's analysis here. He wanted to come on and preview the upcoming season. So let's run through a few more before we do get out of here. Mention Seth Trimble. You know, you and Anthony have been very high on him being this team's leading scorer going into the upcoming year. And I have pushed back on that as much as anybody all offseason. And you even went as far in a conversation we had earlier this summer to say that you think he could average 20 points per game, which would be an all-time season for a guard at Carolina. Have you rethought that opinion and understand the fact that if Michael Jordan couldn't average 20 points at Carolina, it's highly unlikely that a guy like Seth Trimble would be able to do such a thing?
First of all, he did average 20 points a game. But second of all, I've shifted my opinion just a little bit, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this today. And here's the reason why. It's not because I don't think that Seth Trimble could average 20 a game, because I think he could. But on this team, I don't think he needs to. Because of the balance that we have with the scorers and with Luka especially, because I think Luka has the potential to average 15. And if Trimble and Luka are both averaging 15, I feel like this is a really good team, because especially, or offensive team at least, because Caleb Wilson's going to get his. He's too talented to not. Visar's going to get his because he's too talented to not. And then you're going to have guys that come off the bench like Powell, like I've said, who I'm really high on Powell just because I feel like you said, he's going to be his shot. I could watch his shot all day, and he gets it off so quick. Like, you have very little chance of blocking it. So it's not because I don't think that Trimble couldn't average 20 points a game. It's because the balance that this team has. I mean, you could even throw Kyan Evans in there. If Kyan Evans averages 10 a game, there's no need for Trimble to average 20. If it were a team like maybe the year that Cole Anthony was here, when Cole Anthony was basically our entire offense, then Trimble would average 20 a game. But in this case, he really doesn't have to, because we're gonna have 4 or 5 guys that could average 10 a game, and there'll be probably 1 or 2 that are around the 8 or 9 area. So with the amount of talent and scores we have on this team, he doesn't need to average 20 a game. Do I still think he's going to average, maybe 13 plus? Absolutely. I still think he's going to be the leading scorer on this team just because of his talent, getting to the rim, and the improved shot that we've seen out of him. Plus, he's the only returning player the only rotation returning player on the squad. So he's going to get the first look from Hubert Davis, I feel like, in the offense. So when it comes down to it, I still feel like he's going to be the leading scorer. But no, I've changed my opinion on whether he's going to average 20 a game or not.
Yeah, and I think, that's a good thing that you've seen the light, because Carolina's got so many scoring options that I don't need him to average 20 points per game. Carolina needed RJ to average 20 points per, to do what he did 2 years ago when he was an ACC Player of the Year, All-American, and should have been given more consideration to be the National Player of the Year. Like, they needed him to be that because there wasn't the scoring diversity on the roster like there is with this roster. There could be a stretch of games where Carolina plays 5 different games and have 5 different and have 5 different leading scores. I think I almost expect that to happen at some point this year because Visar I think is going to be a better utilized big in Carolina's system to be a much bigger force offensively. Caleb Wilson has an NBA isolation game in his bag already. There's going to be games where they're just guys that cannot handle him. There will be night where Seth Trimble is the best offensive player on the floor. Luka Bogovac can get his offense as easy as anybody on the roster. You got Kyan Evans. Maybe a guy like Jonathan Powell comes off the bench, hits 6 threes, leads Carolina in scoring. So I think that's the thing is that they've taken the burden off of Trimble, off of Kyan Evans in a way that they were never able to take the burden off of RJ Davis, especially a year ago. And that comes back to something we talked about earlier. Better roster construction makes it easier for your guys and should make your guys much more efficient scorers than what we've seen at different times so far. With guards under Hubert Davis's tutelage or watch as the head coach of Carolina basketball. All right, so I kind of talked about this a little bit ago, but I'll let you now address it. Every podcast known to man will have this conversation in the preseason, which is the ceiling and the floor for the upcoming group. We mentioned where Carolina started us out in the preseason AP poll. They're 25th. KenPom has them, 33rd, which would not suggest that they think this is a team worthy of competing for a national championship. But when you look at this season, you look at this roster, you look at the schedule, what is the floor and the ceiling for Carolina basketball in 2025, 2026?
Well, let's just take a quick glance at the schedule because I debated whether or not bringing this up as a full other point. This schedule as a whole is still tough. There's still several ranked games on the schedule that in the non-con, but it's easier than last year. So I feel like the ceiling for Carolina's not going to go into conference play 500. There's too many kind of layup games on this schedule for Carolina to, if we go into conference play 500, Hubert Davis needs to be fired immediately. So I feel like there's more wins to be had. Now, there's not as many quality wins to be had this season. We're still going to have, your games against Duke. We play Louisville at home on February 23rd. That's going to be a game that if Carolina's close to the bubble, which I'm hoping that they aren't, they're going to have to win. So the schedule as a whole is a little bit easier. Roster-wise, though, you look at this roster, man, and it's full of breakout candidate after breakout candidate where, they won't have to, but several of these guys could go average 15 a night and have breakout games where they have 30. It's that simple. And Carolina really only needs one or two of them to emerge as consistent scorers. And this offense is all of a sudden, you look at them as potentially averaging 90 a game. And that as a whole, I feel like can raise the ceiling. And then you look at the athletes on this team and the length on this team, and you say, well, that means they're going to be decent on the defensive side. You still have Trimble as your best perimeter defender. Visar's going to add rim protection. Wilson is a athletic guy that can block shots. You have tall guys on your bench like Zayden High and the dude who I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, but coming off the bench. And not even to mention James Brown, who James Brown's a whole nother topic, but I don't see him cracking the rotation again this year. But you look at this roster and you say, if Carolina can get one or two of these guys to break out and have a really good season and be consistent for this team, this could turn into an Elite Eight Final Four type team very quickly. As for the floor, that's a little bit harder because you have to look at the roster and you say, well, what happens if they don't come together? What happens if something with the chemistry is off, or if Hubert Davis can't find a consistent rotation, or if you guys like Trimble take a step back and just aren't as good. What if Kai and Evans, the step up in competition from the Mountain West, is too much for him, which I don't think it will be, but that's just a scenario. And you look at that and you say, well, even with somebody like Caleb Wilson, this could be a bubble team to missing the tournament. So it's a wide range, but if the ceiling is Final Four and the floor is missing the tournament, we really have no clue what's going to happen. But, with this roster, that those things could happen.
Well, it's par for the course for what Carolina's been under Hubert Davis. When it's hit, they've been Final Four good. It's his first year and his third year. When it hasn't hit, they missed the tournament, and last year was the last team in the tournament. So I'm with you. I think the ceiling is it all comes together. It blossoms into this beautiful thing. It's a Final Four team. They can make the Final Four. And when you pay $14 million for your roster, you should have a roster that's capable of going to the Final Four. If it doesn't hit and Evans isn't what we need him to be, and let's say Caleb Wilson maybe struggles to adjust to college basketball and doesn't back up all the talk he's done on social media, and Carolina can't shoot no better than 33% from the 3-point line, then yeah, this team could surely find itself on the bubble once again come Selection Sunday. Which would not be acceptable, and that'd probably be all she wrote for Hubert Davis's tenure as the head coach of the Tar Heels. So it's wide-ranging, but it's very accurate because that's what Carolina has been the previous 4 years. So I think it's only fitting that we go into this make or break year for your head coach, and that's kind of the feel around that's kind of the outside feel, the 30,000 feet view. I think internally, the closer I've looked at this team, and I've got a chance to see them in person once, hopefully I can get to see them in person again this season, I don't see them being as bad as they've been where they missed the tournament and was the last team in the tournament. I like the roster so much better than I like last year's roster or 3 years ago's roster. So I would say maybe their floor is like they're a 10 seed. But 10 seed could still mean that they're a bubble team heading into the ACC tournament, heading into Selection Sunday, and that's not somewhere we want to be going into this season. The last thing we'll talk about before we get you out of here, Anthony and I have already done a full preview of the BYU exhibition. We label those kind of what to watch for as opposed to full-blown previews like we do once we get into the regular season. But while I got you here, just wanted to get your thoughts on what you're kind of excited to see and what you'll be paying attention to the most when Carolina takes the floor Friday night against preseason top 10 BYU and the number one recruit in college basketball, AJ Dybantsa.
It's going to be a fun one because you look at this and there's a good chance that Carolina has Caleb Wilson matched up against Dybantsa the whole game. And that's just going to be fun. Like, they are two players. I look at their tapes. I look at their highlights. They look eerily similar to each other. So it almost feels like one of those games where if, BYU, don't get me wrong, has a good roster. They've been here before. Dybantsa was just kind of the icing on the cake, the piece that they now have that vaults them up some people's rankings. What I'm looking for is, first of all, how does this team move the ball? Can we get the ball movement that we need to get good shots? And first of all, what's the shot selection like? Do we have guys that like to jack threes? Does Caleb Wilson take bad fadeaways that are heavily contested from 25 feet away? That's kind of what I'm looking for. And then second of all, I want to see what type of role Hubert Davis has for Seth Trimble. Because last year, when he came off the bench, he was the defensive stopper that we gave, you gave him the ball in transition and he was And he was also on the floor as a little bit to be a shooter and a driver. But this year, he's your leader. And I want to see that out of Seth Trimble right out of the gate. And I saw it a little bit over the summer when I was, at camp and watching the scrimmages and stuff like that. I saw it a little bit out of Henry Visar. He's another guy that I'm looking at and saying, what is his role and what can he show? And I think we're going to find out really quickly against BYU just how good this team is, because you think about it, you go on the road and you beat the preseason number 8 team in the country, because we're on the road, correct? I'm correct in saying
it's at Salt Lake City.
Yeah, so you go on the road and beat the number 8 team in a preseason exhibition. You're proving yourself right out of the gate. And honestly, I kind of wish the committee would look at preseason exhibition games, but they don't. So, but you look at it as this is the first real litmus test. The second will be when we play Kansas. And whether they pass or fail, it's going to be really interesting to watch. If they pass, you start thinking, you start raising the floor a little bit. You go from, okay, maybe the floor of this team is a bubble team to maybe the floor is a 9 seed where you're not as much on the bubble. So that's what I'm going to be mostly watching for. And I'm really excited to watch the matchup between Caleb Wilson and AJ DeBansta.
I know you're excited. I'm excited. I think everyone is starting to get excited for the upcoming basketball season, especially given how dreadful Carolina football has been in year 1 under Bill Belichick. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. In the meantime, we will direct you guys to the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. Full coverage of Carolina's exhibition against BYU can be found on the website. There will be a what to watch for preview. Then I'll be back with the recap of the exhibition as well. Carolina and Virginia this weekend in football. Anthony has you covered. All the news earlier in the week when 3 players left the program. We will have the availability report, the game preview, and the game recap all on the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, just search the Four Corners Podcast and we'll pop up. There, we encourage you to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any audio editions of the show. If you're a video consumer to the podcast, if you watch the podcast on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, the best way to be notified is to like and follow us on Facebook at Heel Tough Blog, at YouTube at Heel Tough Blog, or my personal Twitter account at HTB_Josh. Once you like any of those pages, you will get a notification that we are live talking Carolina basketball. But with that, folks, this is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do thank Ashtin once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for both watching and listening. And as always,